Uh, Today, I'm going to touch on a variety of themes. I'm still visiting my own life, the life of my profession, and the life of my clients in the period from probably stretching across the 1960s into the early 70s. I previously mentioned what a struggle we had been going through as a profession that decade. The struggle first for recognition in the form of licensure to become a profession that was regulated and recognized by the various states in this country, and then to begin the battle to get included in insurance reimbursement schemes. So I'll pick up at that point. I mentioned that we had been successful. The New Jersey Psychological Association had passed a Freedom of Choice Act, and in that act, it stated that any health insurance policy written in that state or offered to the members residing in that state had to include the services of psychologists and social workers when it came to the provision of mental health services previously reserved only to physicians. And that wave was beginning to move across the United States from state to state. Well, whatever else insurance companies are, and usually interested in as much profits as they can make, they are not stupid. So quickly, they began to come back to us. They came to the American Psychological Association and raised the issue of they were being asked to reimburse all licensed psychologists for mental health services. And they said, but psychology licensure is generic. There are social scientists who are licensed. There are psychologists who do research for a fee for a private client, and they are licensed. There are things that psychologists do for fees that have nothing to do with what we would reimburse physicians for in terms of mental health treatment. So how can we tell the difference? How can we tell whether somebody is just attempting to move beyond his or her level of competency and training and beginning to tap into our funds when they have no expertise or wisdom about what they're doing? So we tried to counter that. And our first attempt to counter it was to say that there had been a study done by Blue Cross Blue Shield in the 1970s about, they took the city of Washington, D.C. because the federal workers were all covered by a Blue Cross Blue Shield policy. And they asked who is submitting mental health claims under the terms of this policy. And it turned out that 82% of the claims were being submitted by some form of physician, not a psychiatrist. Internists were spending time talking to a patient, and they found out they could bill for time in psychotherapy. So in general, any physician who was creative and wanted to make extra money could take some of the time that he or she was spending talking to the patients that they were seeing and bill for mental health services. So uh, we came back at them saying physicians are engaged in the very kind of fraudulent dealing, as far as we're concerned, as you're accusing our psychology colleagues of being on the verge of doing. We were happy to show them the code of ethics that says that any psychologist that operates outside his realm of expertise, training, and experience was engaged in unethical behavior, and we were putting in place enforcement mechanisms that would probably take care of that problem in a reasonable fashion. They would have none of it. They wanted something much more ironclad. They wanted to be able to identify on the face of it, psychologists who were turning in claim forms that they were indeed qualified. So one of our members came up with a bright idea. A bright idea. This is the law of unintended consequences. He suggested we would be willing to create a new organization. It would be called the National Register of Health Service Providers in Psychology. We would do the screening. In order to be a member of the National Register of Health Service Providers in Psychology, somebody would have to graduate from a doctoral program in clinical psychology approved by the American Psychological Association Committee on Accreditation, and would have to have had at least 1 year of full-time internship in a setting that had other professions, primarily the medical profession, working in that setting too, as consultants or as staff members. And if they qualified with those two criteria, they could be a member of and listed in the National Register. And if anybody turned in an insurance claim, you could look them up in the National Register, and you could deny claims for people who weren't listed in the National Register. You'd have to give us some months to do the phase-in of this enterprise, but we will start it if that will meet your needs. And an agreement was made with the insurance companies to proceed in that direction. And we did found the National Register of Health Service Providers in Psychology. And for the first time, we took a public policy position that doing what we now call psychotherapy is a health service. We are in the domain of health. We participate in health services, and we're like other people who practice some form of health services. We screwed around with our own identity. Up until then, I had been very happy with our history. For the longest time, all of us who use psychological principles to try and affect human life identified ourselves as applied psychologists. That was a generic term for all of us. I didn't like it that we were splitting into smaller camps, that we're now becoming industrial organizational psychologists, we're becoming educational psychologists, we're becoming clinical psychologists and counseling psychologists. It was the balkanization of psychology. And now, within those of us who are clinical psychologists, we're going to differentiate health service providers out of clinical psychologists. And it didn't feel good to me. I felt an ominous threat was happening in return for our being included in insurance reimbursement schemes. Well, the, 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 the insurance reimbursement paradigm started in this fashion, but after a while, the insurance companies decided they didn't need to be so vigilant. They were beginning to invent managed care. They had better ways of protecting their profits than this thing that they were doing to us. And they got smart. The truth of the matter is only 0.7% of all healthcare dollars were being spent on outpatient psychotherapy. They were jacking around with something that really wasn't a large part of what their costs were about. And they moved towards managed care, and they abandoned using the National Register listing as the entry point for psychologists into reimbursement schemes. And the National Register has been, it still exists. It's been struggling ever since to try and find something to do to continue to get people to pay an annual fee to be listed and to provide some kind of services to the membership. Right now, they're very busy providing a service to identifying people for possible reimbursement in other states. They're trying to deal with the crossing state lines to offer services problem as their bailiwick, and they're going to try and be in the forefront of making that happen this many years later. But that's a whole other thing I don't know. I don't need to go into. I'm going to end this portion of my presentation by selling, what does it say in the Bible? Something about selling your birthright for a mess of pottage. That's what I think we did when we started to declare what we did was a health service. That we were engaged in health service provision, and our homeland was in the house of medicine, and along with all the other people who participated, like nurses and technicians and all kinds of other adjunct professionals who were in the house of medicine. The house of medicine is a terrible place to reside. I never liked it when I was interning in it. I still don't like it, and I think with the craziness of American healthcare delivery, it's not a good home for us. I wish we had not gone after the reimbursement dollars. I wish we had simply remained as applied psychologists and tried to find some way to finance client care. I won't even call them patients, client care that does not rely on insurance dollars. We have other learned professions who succeed very well. There are accountants, there are architects, there are lawyers, there are others. They all exist as professionals who provide services of one sort or another, and none of those is being reimbursed by insurance dollars, health insurance dollars. People find some way to pay for the services, and it doesn't involve having to file claim forms with insurance companies. And I think we would have been better off if we had resisted the temptation. Surely I will acknowledge we would have remained a much smaller profession with fewer people in practice, but we would not have been trapped in all the problems that healthcare financing and insurance companies cause for us to, in terms of how and under what circumstances we deliver our services, who reviews them, and who can make decisions about what we're doing. I will repeat, we sold our birthright for a mess of pottage. Let me move on to other developments in the profession. I'll save my personal life for last if I have time. I was still struggling, of course, with what it is I'm doing. I was trying to listen to as many points of view as possible. The 70s were a time of fulminating invention. All kinds of therapies were being tried out and invented. Cognitive behavioral therapy started to replace behavior therapy. Psychoanalysis was moving from being originally a theory of pathology under the ego psychology rubric had moved to become a field that studied ordinary human development, and it was now moving on to becoming what was called object relations psychoanalysis. For the first time, human beings were being treated as if they were not totally autonomous units that developed, and forces inside themselves controlled their behavior. Psychoanalysts were now paying attention to the fact that human relations and the effect of human relations on people were just as important as any autonomous internal lifespan developments that may have been knocked off course by trauma. So psychoanalysis was moving on. Primal therapy had been invented, where the birth trauma is what causes most human distress, and people should re-experience the birth trauma and scream about it. Group therapy was becoming very popular. I had never had any training in my psychoanalytic program about doing group therapy, but there were many of my colleagues who believed in group therapy either as an adjunct to individual therapy or as a thing in and of itself that had its own goodness about it. Family therapy and systems therapy were being explored, written about, and experimented with. It was a time of great ferment and change. Oh, thank you. I gave myself a laugh. I had a wonderful memory. I was going to an APA convention. I think that year was in New York, and I went to the headquarters hotel, and the new division of humanistic existential psychology was having an experiential exercise in the lobby of the main hotel, and everybody was gathered around, seated on the floor in yoga posture, and they were chanting Om together frequently. that was my welcome to the convention that year. So we were on the fringes of everything. The 60s has stuck with us on into the 70s. And we were experimenting with everything, letting it all hang out, as the hippie expression used to go, and arguing with each other about what the correct way to welcome people in our consulting room was, and what kinds of things should we pay attention to and know about. It was both a very exciting and inspiriting and very confusing time. In the 70s, I was chosen by the Division of Psychotherapy to become an editor of the journal, Psychotherapy Theory, Research, and Practice. please forgive the phone that's ringing in the background. I'm sure it'll go away in a second. One of the great things about being Zoom is in your natural environment. You have to put up with that, what happens in it. One more ring. Okay, now it'll be quiet again. So I was happy to be the editor of the journal. I felt very trusted by my colleagues to do a good job. And I had to receive manuscripts during those 7 years from almost every theoretical orientation known to the human race. For the first time, I started reading Adlerian manuscripts that were being submitted and Jungian manuscripts that were coming in. The division believed it should represent no particular organized religion. It should be open to anybody who was doing anything in the field to advance knowledge, to advance research, and to advance supervision. That's what it was. The title of the journal was. So I was in the midst of everything. And as journal editor, I had to make the final decision about what get published and what would not. And I had to make that decision in fairness to everything that had been submitted to me. So I myself was being washed in the river of many competing orientations. And it was helping me to be both confused and experimental in my work. One of the things that stuck with me was I decided to make a serious attempt to see what group therapy was all about, to learn about it and to begin to practice group. For me, I never wanted, I was not drawn to just doing group therapy and having no other relationship with the people I was seeing in group. I wanted to see people individually. And for some of them, I would make a choice that group would be a good adjunct and I would adjust their fees so they could start coming to a group meeting once a week as well as seeing me at least once a week. And one of the reasons I did that was it was people primarily that could talk to me very well and describe experiences to me, but I had some sneaking suspicion that I didn't really see how they were interacting with other people. I didn't trust some of their reports of experiences they were having with others, and I wanted them in a laboratory where I could actually watch them interacting with others. So that's why I brought them into group. And I will foreshadow something. Two of the people that are memorable to me from the ongoing group I ran was a woman who was in her early 30s, married and had 4 children, and was in a very troubled marriage. And he was a young man in his middle 20s, and he had just finished school, and he was trying to, he had a job he didn't like. He was struggling with vocational challenges. Did he want to go to graduate school? And what did he want to go to graduate school if he did? He really loved writing. Should he seriously try to write the great American novel? He was in the multifaceted crossroads of his 20s and wanting some help and encouragement. Well, for some reason, the chemistry was very intense between the slightly older woman and the guy in his 20s. And they started to go out for coffee together after group meeting, talking about, I don't know what they were talking about. I had a rule that people should not keep private connections. If they made connections with each other, they should discuss what was happening in the group. After a while, they started to, and they just said, we talk about life, we talk about our problems, we talk about our dreams, we talk about anything that people talk about. We become very intimate with each other, and we enjoy the pleasure of each other's company. He wanted to get sexual with her, and she said she was not up for that. She would see him, they could spend some time together, but there would be no sex in their relationship. And for whatever reasons, mainly my restlessness and my dissatisfaction at home and my undone attempt to have an affair, I was very jealous. I found her a very appealing person too. And his flirting with her, his attempt to talk seduction with her, his being as close to her as he has managed to get, left me just insanely jealous. I wanted to be in his position, and I fought it. I just fought it, worked my way through it as best I could, talked to colleagues about it, got supervision, resisted the temptation, and just bore into it. And I was very relieved when he finally left the group, and I was even more relieved about a year later when she terminated with me too. And I didn't have to be in that horrible cauldron of longing anymore. The other two experiences I had with group were I was very, very admiring of the pioneering work of a colleague who lived here in Southern California named Fred Stoller. Fred was the chief psychologist at a local state mental hospital. We warehoused people back then. Many of them had stayed there for years, some for most of their adult lifetime, and they were still uh, uh, residents of the state mental hospital. Governor Reagan threw them out finally, and supposedly community mental health centers that were going to be created to take up the care of them and no longer warehouse them in hospitals. But the first half of what went on began, but the second half never took place. And that's one of the reasons why we have so many homeless people now. Be that as it may, Fred Stoller was different than his satisfied warehousing people, giving them electric shock treatment or electrical shock treatment or experimenting with a new psychiatric drugs. He wanted to see if they could be approached in a systemic and psychological fashion to try and help them on the road to rehabilitation. So he asked a social worker to help him, and they were going to do the following experiment. They were going to identify 10 inmates who had been there at least 2 years and were going to be kept there, who had seemingly some skills that were useful. They could do manual labor, they could write. One of them had been a cook in previous life, so they could cook. And the idea was they were going to try a week of absolutely intense therapy. They would bring them together as a group. They were going to try to see if they could create the equivalent of an artificial family, to get the very deranged people to feel a sense of connectedness to and responsibility for the other 9 of them. And then they were going to rent a large old house somewhere close to the hospital, and the social worker was going to move into the house with the other 10 patients out of the hospital and into a house in the community. And they would split up the chores. They would take turns housekeeping. Those who could maybe even get a job in the community would go out to their community job every day and then come back and be a member of the household group. So what was the therapy they were going to do? They called it marathon therapy. They came up with the label. So for 7 days straight, the patients were going to give patients, because they called them patients in the mental hospitals. The patients would get up in the morning, shower, have breakfast, and then come to the meeting room. And they would keep meeting until meal break and for lunch, and then meal break in the evening, and they would stay up until 1 or 2 in the morning. And they would keep meeting and keep talking. And they would do it for 7 days. And in the journal article they created, they said that the intensity and the pressure cooker of the constant conversation, meeting, attempts to work over all those days led to the ending of certain kinds of resistances about bonding, about being real, about talking straight, about being a human being rather than being a tormented soul who hid from human beings. And as was wanted, they moved out of the hospital and took up their residence, and 70% of them graduated from that house to ordinary lives in the community. 30% of them crumbled and had to be brought back into the hospital. But the experiment had been very, very successful. With the putting of that little amount of energy and that little expense for the rental of the house and buying supplies to the house, these 7 patients didn't have to become perennial residents in the mental hospital, consuming resources and public funds for their care in the mental hospital. So I was very impressed. And individuals in practice started to experiment with marathon therapy as an adjunct to their own practices with ordinary people, not with just with psychotics. And I will talk some more about that in a future lecture. But I too wanted to do this kind of experimentation with the people I was seeing. What would happen if I took a group of 10 or 12, my ordinary clients, and instead of just seeing them once a week for a couple hours in a group, I did an intense marathon therapy session. Very worth pursuing. But the final story about my connection with group therapy happened when I got a phone call from Fred Stoller. He knew I was the journal editor, and so he was going to submit something to the journal, wanted to talk to me about that. But he said, by the way, while we're talking, could I come and see you as a client? And I almost fell off my chair. He was significantly older than I was. He was at least a decade older than I was. I looked up to him. He had been around. He was a very sensitive and capable therapist. I had heard presentations he had made at various professional meetings, as well as the paper that he had sent to me, which was very well written. And I felt inadequate. I was too soon out of school. What was I doing dealing with a very significant person in my profession? How the hell could I be his therapist? So I was up for that philosophy I announced last time. I felt like everybody who was trying to show up in my office had been sent for some purpose, some mystical purpose, and there was something I needed to learn. So I agreed to see Fred, and I was tied up in knots for the first visit. I was stuttering and stammering, and he said, "Does this make you uncomfortable to see me?" So I started talking to him about my discomfort seeing him, and we had a long conversation about that. He said, he believed I could be helpful. I seemed to be a sensitive and thoughtful person. He respected me, and I should set myself free, just blunder along with him, do whatever came to me to do. And he thought it would turn out okay. So, with his blessings and his go ahead, I proceeded. It became clear he was struggling to make a very painful decision. He believed that the meaning had gone out of his marriage. He had a young child who was 10 years old. He'd been married for 15 years by this time. And it wasn't that he was drawn to anybody else, but he felt like somehow he had been on a journey and had lost his connection with his wife. They weren't interested in the same things anymore. She seemed dull and disinteresting to him. He enjoyed talking to his friends and to other people more than he did with his wife. He didn't look forward to going home. While he enjoyed the pleasure of company of his child, there was nothing he could point to that was terrible about his wife. He didn't hate her. They were not fighting a lot. It's just like something had been dying for him. And is that sufficient reason to leave a marriage? So I continued to work for him, with him. And one day he said, I say I'm lying too much. I tell her I love her. I tell her I'm glad I'm married to her. I'm not, I don't feel that way. Actually, and this is terrible to say, if she got killed in an automobile accident on the freeway tomorrow, I would feel relieved. I wouldn't have to be a fraud anymore. I could just be myself. And my son and I could just be alone, and I could raise him, and I wouldn't have to worry about who she was and feel responsive to her and responsible for her and disinterested in her. And you know what? I'm going to leave. I think it's terrible. My kid will be all upset. I, I am going to be hated by my own family. I'm going to be hated by her family. But I have to follow what's happening to me and what feels like it's developing in me. And I said I would be there. He could continue to talk to me after the separation. I would try and have him make sense out of it. Maybe he would decide to go back after he separated for a while. I didn't know what his fate was going to be, but he could continue to come to see me, and we continued to work together for another several months. And during that period of time, he did accidentally meet a woman, and he started to spend time with her, and it felt vital and alive and meaningful to him. And he had the kind of connection with her he had yearned for with his wife. So he came to tell me he thought he wasn't going to be seeing me much more because he was going to move in with his girlfriend and he was filing for divorce. And now he was going to divorce his wife and move on. And she was a very kind person. She'd already met his son. His son liked her, and he was sure they could make a lovely step family together. So he said he wanted to have one final visit to make sure he wasn't overlooking something, and he'd be in to see me next Wednesday. So next Wednesday came, and he didn't show up, and there was no message. And that was certainly not like him. So he had given me the contact number of the girlfriend in case there was ever any emergency of some kind. I should call her because she would be able to inform me what the emergency was. And I waited to see if he was going to call for about 24 hours. He didn't. And then I decided, all right, this is out of character for him. And I called her and I got her on the phone and she started crying. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, Fred died yesterday. I said, what? And she said, yes, he had to go to the bank and get some cash, and he went to cash a check, and he was standing in line in the bank, and he suddenly had a massive aneurysm blow in his brain, and he died. He bled out before they could get him to the hospital and do anything. I'm sorry, he's dead. And she started crying some more. And that was it. That was the end of my relationship with him. And I felt so angry. That man was such a valuable human being, such good work and important work. And he had fought so hard to try to define what his path was and had the courage to do something that many people fall back from and won't do. They'll live in emptiness and frustration and despair, quiet despair over the rest of the years of their life. But he voted to live for freshness and aliveness and meaningfulness. And on the brink of his taking the next important step into his new life, he got wiped out. It felt like some kind of fucking cruel joke to me. I was really very upset myself. And I started crying because he had died. That seems so unfair. It still seems unfair to me. All right, I'll catch a breath and take a pause at that point. Oh, I have lots of time to talk still. That's good. Uh, I will go back into my personal life. I became an adulterer finally. How did I become an adulterer? 5 months after the married woman who had been in my group left, I was out in the market and I bumped into her. She was in the same market I was marketing at. She said hello to me and I said hello to her. And back then, as long as we weren't in a dual relationship, there was no prohibition against sex with former clients. There was only a prohibition about being in a dual relationship with current clients. So I didn't know, she never talked about any romantic feelings for me. She seemed to respond to me with warmth. We had a nice working alliance with each other. So I decided, I said, are you busy? I have a couple free hours. Can I take you out to lunch? I'll put the groceries in my trunk and they won't, I have no ice cream, nothing's gonna melt, it'll be okay. And she said, yeah, I'll go out to lunch with you. So we started talking, and she said, sometimes I miss my therapy sessions with you, but I felt like I was in an impasse. It was the Fred Stoller problem. I'm in this terrible marriage. I can't leave it. I have 4 sons. What's going to become of me if I leave my present husband? And I have 4 sons. Who's going to want to be interested in making any kind of new life with me? I'll be giving up on having anybody around, any kind of partner. My husband is a decent partner in some way. He's very handy. He can repair things. And he leaves me alone. I'm lonely. That's the worst sin he commits. My kids are lonely for him too. He's very busy. He's in commercial and individual real estate. So he's out showing houses at night or on the weekends. He's busy all the time, and he's making a lot of money, and he's not home, and he doesn't seem very interested in being home. Maybe he's having an affair. I don't know, but I feel trapped, and there didn't seem to be anything you could do to help me with my being trapped. So I just decided I would, uh, maybe I'll go back to college or do something like that. Maybe that's something for me to do, but therapy didn't seem relevant anymore to me. So I left, and I said, well, there is something that you could do. I said, I'm very infatuated with you, and I'm trapped too. I have two children. I can't leave my marriage. I made a sacred vow to myself when I adopted children that I was never going to, well, I made a vow when my father died during my adolescence. I was never going to leave children if I had children. And now I had children, and I was not going to leave either. I couldn't consider breaking up my marriage before I was 18. I've always yearned for stumbling across some woman who's trapped like I'm trapped. And the two of us, at least some hours, periodically could get together and enjoy what's possible between a man and a woman. And I'm willing to become an adulterer. Are you willing to become an adulterer? And she stopped for a moment and she said, let me think about it. I'll let you know. I said, please think about it. I'm serious. I would love if we could take some pleasure in knowing each other and being together as friends and as lovers. I would enjoy having you around. My oldest is going to be 5 soon. I enjoy having you around and for the next 20 years or so until they grew up and didn't need me anymore. We could be each other's companions in secret and have some goodness between a man and a woman for that period of time. That's my hope, to get some impossible relationship with somebody like that. She said, I'll think about it. She called me back 2 days later and said, yeah, I'm willing to explore that possibility. So we started first to spend some tentative time with each other, and then finally we went to a motel and we made love. And I had the strangest reaction. As I was making love to her, I wanted to yell in celebration, my God, I'm an adulterer. It just felt wonderful. It felt delicious. It felt fulfilling. It felt like a dream was coming true. And she was a very, very special and dear companion to me. We would get together 2 or 3 times a week. I rode that current for about 3 years. I was able to keep it going and never any real trouble. It was delicious, delightful, wonderful. That's one of the things about an affair. You don't get to see people constantly. So every new coming together is a wonder. It's delightful. Also, she filled in for me and I for her in many ways that are not usual in an affair. My former wife hated the wilderness, and I love going backpacking. So I could make up stories about who I was going backpacking with, and I would go with my lover. She loved the wilderness too. She was happy to come backpacking with me. And as a matter of fact, since her husband was absent so often and so much, I sometimes took one or another of her kids with us. I would stop by dinner on the way home from work sometimes in her house and have dinner with her and her children and do their homework with them and fill in for their absent father. And she would just tell him that she had a male friend, and he didn't seem concerned at all. He didn't seem jealous or possessive or mind that I stopped by for dinner maybe once every 2 weeks, one evening going home from work and spending time with his children. I liked them. They were very nice boys, and I enjoyed traveling. My wife also had gotten burned out on going to professional conventions. So when I had to travel to conventions, often the woman who was my lover came with me to the convention, and we would have time to explore whatever city we were in and go to a play or a movie or concert or something while we were there outside of the meeting hours and have a delightful time together. She was a wonderful traveling companion. A few years in, it began to crumble. And that was an agony. I could see she was troubled, and she was not as free with me and as readily available when we were together. She was brooding about something, and finally she told me what it was. She said, "I can't go on this way anymore. I get only a part of you, and I'm grateful for the part that I can have, but I'm going to see against all odds, is it possible to get divorced and have what you and I have somehow?" She said, "I have no right to ask you to leave. I just can't stand it with my husband anymore, though. I am going to leave." She said, "If you could screw up your courage and break your vow and come away with me, I would be delighted. But you never promised me you'd do that, and I don't know whether you'll do it or not." And I said, "Let me think about that. You thought about getting involved with me. Now I need to think about whether I can manage to extricate myself from what I'm bogged down in." So she said, "All right, how long is it going to take you?" I said, "I'll give you an answer in 2 weeks." And we continued seeing each other in a kind of restrained fashion until the 2 weeks was up. And I said, "All right, I've decided I am going to do it. I am going to leave. I'm going to screw my courage up. I'm going to jump off the cliff and I will extricate myself. I'm going to tell my wife that I'm leaving her, and I'll deal with my children too." And then I started the merry man's horseshit. I said, you'll have to give me 2 weeks. My sister is coming to stay with us for 2 weeks, 2 weeks from now. And I can't do it then. I can't make family disruption with my sister coming to stay. So that was off the table. And then we would see each other some more. And then my son is having his birthday party. I don't want to ruin his birthday party by telling him his father is leaving and a divorce is coming. I can't ruin that. I had one excuse after another, and I stalled for about 2 months implementing what I said I was going to do. And then finally, she came to see me and I started crying. And I said, "I have been lying to you and lying to myself. I can't do this. I'm not going to do that. You're going to have to go on without me. And I am staying home, and I will live with whatever unhappiness I have to master and manage until my children are grown and out of the house. And then I will leave at that point, but I am not going to leave between now and then." And both of us were crying. And I tried to comfort her. I said, "I feel so guilty about all the pain I'm causing you now. I got you into this and now you're crying because it's become unbearable to be in this, and it's unbearable to leave this." And she said, "You didn't do anything wrong. Please don't apologize to me. You always were very clear with me about what this arrangement was to be, and I'm the one who's breaking out of it and telling you I can't live this way anymore. That's not your fault. I will always cherish the moments I've shared with you. And please know this, the fact that," this is the wisdom she left me with, "the fact that you got born ensures that you will hurt and disappoint everybody who's importantly connected to you. You cannot be an extension of everyone else's longings for who you should be, what you should do, and what you should provide. You'll make hard choices often across the rest of your life, refusing to do something that somebody else insists is essential for them. That's not a bad thing. That's just part of what it means to be human," she said to me. And she said, "It's time for me to go now. I'll leave you with that." And she walked out of we were in a motel. She walked out of the motel room, and I thought, I'm never going to see her again. Oh, and I was so disconsolate. I love that word. I was disconsolate. I went back to my arid home, driving slower every minute, slowing down to stall my arrival time. I walked in. I hid my distress successfully. And then I went into intense and powerful mourning. Almost every night I had insomnia. I would get up and go in another room and I would cry, and I would miss the woman I had said goodbye to. Really important, painful death had happened for me. Finally, after about 6 weeks of crying every night and not being able to stop the flood of tears, I had an inspiration. My former wife was sleeping peacefully in the other room. She either didn't pay any attention to the fact I was gone, didn't care I was gone, or simply slept through my being gone. But this time, I put some clothes on and I walked quietly out into the backyard. I started the car as quietly as I could. And I drove from where I lived, was about 5 miles to where my former girlfriend lived. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning when I got there. And I knocked on her door, and she came sleepy-eyed and sleepy-headed to the door, opened the door. And she looked at me in surprise, and she said, "Did you leave your wife?" And I said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I want 3 minutes to talk to you. Can I see you for 3 minutes? And then I'll leave." And she said, "Come in, whatever it is you want to say, I'll listen to." And I told her the following. I was not going to rescue her. I was not going to become seriously involved with her. I was not going to leave my family, and I was not going to ever marry her. But I asked her, I've been gone now for many weeks. Have you started seeing any other man yet? She said, no, I was grieving for you, and I was just beginning to get ready to spend time with somebody else. And I said, so you're not serious about anybody, or you don't have a potential candidate to get serious about. She said, no. And I said, then, well, why are you throwing me away? I said, I believe I might be able to become your best girlfriend. I said to her, let me be your best girlfriend. Stay with me. If you want to not have sex with me anymore, that's fine. If we're going to have sex together, that's fine. But I want to be in your life. I want to hear about your struggles. I want to absorb them. I want to comfort you. I want to tell you about my life. I want to continue the friendship, at least the friendship part of what we have. And if you get very serious with some man, if somebody shows up and you need to end the friendship with me, I'll understand and I'll go. But don't throw me away when you don't have to. I'm no impediment to your doing anything at this point. So we started again, and I started to see her frequently, and I was her best girlfriend. She would tell me about the man when she was meeting. I would try to counsel her about who was good, who was not so good, how to manage her relationship with them. And slowly over the next year, she got more and more involved with somebody. And wonder of wonders, even though she had 4 children, he was childless. He was divorced and childless, and he liked her children, and he proposed marriage to her, and she accepted. And the last time I saw her was the week of her marriage, and I gave her a hug and said a final goodbye to her. And once more the morning started. All right, it looks like it's time for me to stop there. The path will lead for what happened after that finally took me to my present wife of 49 years duration. But that's maybe for the next time or sometime after that. I will throw the floor open to those who have been listening at this point. Who wants to start?
I have a question, Arthur, about the practice of psychotherapy and insurance. Do you feel that psychotherapy practice is steering away from insurance companies and insurance reimbursement at this point in time based on what you had said before?
I think some portion of of us who have been around. Well, I never got on that train to begin with. That's another story I have to tell, how I avoided and why I didn't. But even those who have gotten on that train, after many years, many of them don't want to put up with what they have to go through trying to service insurance claims and dealing with insurance personnel, and are gradually weaning themselves off of that. Yes, there is that trend. But there's a countervailing trend that the young people who are starting up feel like they need to sign up for insurance panels because they believe that's going to give them steady referrals and will help them build a practice for themselves. So it's happening in different ways at both ends of the career path.
How do you see future trends, or do you see any future trends in regard to that?
Yes. I believe we're going. Oh God! Look what's going on here. I am being assaulted by phones of all kinds. I believe by the middle of the century, we will have shed our identities as clinical psychologists. What are we doing with that identity? You're starting me down a path I was going
Hmm.
to go down at another time. We are embracing a vision of what we do is we take hurting and handicapped people and we lead them to a better adjustment to life. We are throwing away working with the entire population. We have something to offer to anybody who has a variety of different kind of dilemmas that are not traditional mental health dilemmas. How about the couple who's struggling with infertility? That is a terrible stressor in anybody's life. Psychologists should be involved in helping them to make the complicated decisions they have to. They have a very high divorce rate, by the way, if they have infidelity, to help them to be good partners to each other and teach them how they can maintain the quality of life of their partnership, even though they're going through this terrible life stressor. That's an example. There are developmental issues we must confront, many of which are normative and many of which are unusual. And psychologists have something to say about all of them. And we shouldn't be limiting ourselves to psychiatric diagnoses. People have to have a psychiatric diagnosis, and then we work with them to soften that or make it better, and then we let go of them. No, we are tribal elders. That's what we are. We have lots of wisdom about what people have to endure in a lifetime, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we can be really good and helpful companions to almost anybody at some point in that person's life. And we've given away that market like idiots.
And you don't feel that we're going to retain that market?
No, we're going to ignore it. Oh, particularly, I believe we will have a more rational healthcare plan by the middle of the century too, and a more inclusive healthcare plan, and that psychologists will be easily included, and it won't mess with us very much. So many people will stay in that model. They'll work in the house of medicine, and they'll do things within that model, and they'll make a reasonable living.
Hmm.
Yeah,
My
in the
motivation.
in the corporatization of psychology, there's not a lot of room for the wise village elder, I don't think.
Let me decline this too. God, I can't get rid of it. Where is it?
Live television.
Okay, I finally declined it. I figured it out.
Also, Arthur, thank you for finally having an affair. This has been very frustrating. All of these attempts, these closeness. What I've learned today, especially, is, or what I want to know is, you met this girl in the aisle at the market, but what aisle was it?
I do not remember. Oh, I'll make one. I was fresh produce.
Okay, good. You also, and I'm sure this is again another a whole video, but you actually had a little bit of a Freudian slip when you were talking about being the editor of the journal. You said we didn't want to be one-sided with any organized religion.
Yes. No, that was purposeful. Well, the movements and the orientations in our field are very much like cults. They get specialized training, they get a certificate in that, and that's what they specialize in. That's what they do. It becomes, they're like Procrustes. It's one size fits all, and somebody comes to see you, and you implement that strategy with them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's I guess that fits in nicely with the corporatization kind of an idea, and the HMOs and all that stuff.
Anything else? Well, hearing no protest, I think it's time for me to stop now, and I'll see who has so urgently been chasing me. Thank you. I'll see you
Okay.
next week.
All right. We'll
Bye.
see you next
All
week.
right.
Bye now.
Bye, guys. Nice seeing you all.
Bye.